Hey everyone! Much like with the Indy 5 review, it seems that there have been a lot of requests for a breakout segment from the Rogue One video. With the Indy 5 video, everybody wanted a breakout segment chronicling the deterioration of Indy's costume across the 5 films. They wanted that to be a standalone video they could show other people. With Rogue One, the request has been, can you do just a breakout segment that is your exhaustive analysis of the lost original cut of Rogue One? Now, while that comprises the majority of the video, that seems to be their want for too long didn't read, and we want to honor that. So thanks to Chronically Online for helping me get this edit together, and thank you to the patrons for making the full Rogue One video possible, just like you guys made the full Indy 5 review possible. Without the patrons for this channel, those more epic analytical videos would never get made. And they are what set RetroBlasting apart, I believe, from a lot of other channels of a similar bend online. The link to the full Rogue One video is in the description, in the end card at the end of this video. It's also in the description of this video. I highly encourage you, if this video interests you and you haven't watched the full Rogue One video, to do so. Thank you again to our patrons. Thanks again to everybody who watches these videos, hits those likes and subscribes, and hits that notification bell and all that stuff that most YouTubers say annoyingly every time they do a video. And without further ado, here is the full lost cut analysis of Rogue One. Given the abysmal track record that Disney has managed with Star Wars since 2015's The Force Awakens, a lot of us have been saying we'd be fine with all of the Disney stuff getting erased and everyone starting over from a blank page. In the same breath, many people will throw out the caveat that Rogue One is the outlier, the one they didn't totally hate. Now, there are haters of Rogue One. However, you don't hear from them as often as the people who concede Rogue One was the least offensive Disney Star Wars effort. And yet, despite all of that, it's an uneven experience fraught with behind-the-scenes drama like everything Kathleen Kennedy has touched, resulting in a Star Wars story that is both fun and frustrating in equal measure. It feels more like Star Wars than anything else Disney has done, yet it comes off as confused and trepidatious. I have asked myself many times since its release why I like it well enough to own it when I don't own any other Disney Star Wars film, but not well enough to fight for it if presented with the opportunity to erase the entire Disney Star Wars canon. The simple truth is because I'm more in love with the Rogue One we were promised rather than the Rogue One we were given. Rogue One's trailer story is just as important, if not more so, because it was here where Disney laid the groundwork for the fan confusion and vocal backlash after the film premiered. Having deleted content in film trailers is nothing new. Go back to the original Star Wars films and the trailers are famous for little shots and moments that didn't make it into the final film. Most notably brief snippets of C-3PO and R2-D2's encounter with the Wampa, and Luke and Leia about to kiss in The Empire Strikes Back before they were retconned as siblings in Return of the Jedi. And speaking of Return of the Jedi, how about that blue lightsaber? Point is, a few deleted bits here and there show up in trailers on a regular basis. Hell, an entire actress, Ana de Armas, showed up in the trailer for Yesterday before being totally deleted from the film, prompting a lawsuit by theater goers who claimed false advertising by the studio. And Rogue One's trailer game is jammed somewhere between the deleted crumbs in those original trilogy previews and the bait-and-switch deception of an entire actress no longer in the final edit. Because Rogue One's previews are almost, with the benefit of hindsight, a look into the spiraling transformation the film went through. The first teaser is just that, a teaser with hardly anything to see. So we'll disqualify this one as merely something to get fanboys hyping on their socials and soy-facing without dignity. It's when you watch the first full teaser that an audit when compared with the actual film reveals that virtually all of the content contained within it isn't in the final cut of the movie. Even many of the shots in the trailer that are depicting scenes that ended up in the final film are themselves not used shots or alternate takes of similar footage. An example of this is the opening shot itself, which follows Jyn Erso through the door of the Yavin hangar as she's led in handcuffs to Rebel Command. The doorway shot isn't in the theatrical film, and the shot following Jyn through the hangar, while similar to the final shot used, is a different take on the same day. All of the lines in the teaser are not present in the final film. Of particular note is how various versions of Jyn's interrogation by Rebel Command in each of the Rogue One trailers changes, but in every case, little to nothing of the shots and dialogue used across all of the previews of this scene reflect anything in the final film. Specifically in the teaser, Jyn utters the often mocked line,
"This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel."
That line doesn't appear in the final film, but neither do any of Mon Mothma's or General Draven's in reading Jyn's dossier.
Forgery of Imperial documents, possession of stolen property, aggravated assault, resisting arrest.
On your own from the age of 15, reckless, aggressive, and undisciplined.
Nor their lines about the Death Star.
We have a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know what it is and how to destroy it.
He's claiming the Emperor is creating a weapon with the power to destroy entire planets.
It's possible these lines were recorded for the purposes of making a trailer. However, given what has been revealed by the cast about the making of the film, particularly Ben Mendelsohn's interview, it has been confirmed that scenes were often shot multiple ways with very different dialogue between versions. And this was all done prior to the reshoots managed by Gilroy after he was brought onto the picture. Point being, these lines might have been in play at some point, but were all ultimately jettisoned. Playing over this are some shots that are alternate angles of existing scenes, such as this shot of Jyn fighting with the stormtroopers, now seen over Cassian's shoulder through the alleyway. And this shot of Jyn silently looking around a corner in her headscarf while K2SO or some similar Imperial droid stands behind her. This scene is not in the film whatsoever. An unfinished effects shot of Jyn looking out the window of the U-Wing as it races away from Jedha. Entire alternate effects shots of the Death Star dish being put into place. More alternate takes and more shots that flat out aren't in the film.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
And then we come to Forrest Whitaker's bald version of Saw Guerrera, who only appears in the theatrical cut once.
Go.
But in this teaser represents the bulk of what Rogue One would be marketed as to fans and moviegoers. All of his lines are meant to sell powerful thematic ideas about war and rebellion that are very relevant to the human condition, but have never been explored in a Star Wars film before.
What will you do when they catch you? What will you do if they break you? If you continue to fight, what will you become?
And when we're investing in a story about a civil war and a rebellion, it's an aspect of the galaxy far, far away that is worthy of attention. These are the most powerful lines in all of Rogue One, but alas, they were spoken by a version of the character that was completely deleted from the final cut of the movie. And this is the moment where the teaser accelerates into our first hints of the lost version of Rogue One, with Jyn and Cassian racing through the Imperial train station, as Whitaker challenges Jyn's resolve in deleted dialogue while shots of the entirely deleted and now infamous Scarif beach battle sequence play up the stakes, with a hint of Darth Vader's life support tube on Mustafar in yet another alternate shot. Then the entire teaser ends on yet another deleted line and deleted shot that threw Star Wars fans into hyperactive speculation, as Jyn is shown in an Imperial soldier's uniform as Saw Gerrera says,
"What will you become?"
That's just the full teaser, where more than 90% of the content would never appear in the released film, as even most of the shots from scenes in the final movie are themselves different takes. The first full trailer would muddy the waters further, while actual shots from the film do begin to sprinkle into the Rogue One marketing at this stage, and immediately we are introduced to a Saw Gerrera with hair as he is depicted in the final film, though once again uttering lines that aren't in the actual movie.
The world is coming undone.
While Jyn reacts to him in a room that is nowhere to be found in the final cut, although we have to assume this was somewhere on the soundstage for Guerrera's original safe house.
The world is coming undone. Imperial flags reign across the galaxy. You can stand to see the Imperial flag reign across the galaxy.
Then we get even more deleted footage and dialogue from Jyn's interrogation by Rebel Command.
Can you be trusted without your shackles?
Let's just get this over with, shall we?
We have a mission for you.
What is this?
It's a chance for you to make a fresh start. We think you might be able to help us. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know how to destroy it.
And then more deleted footage and dialogue from Cassian and Jyn talking on Yavin.
If you're really doing this, I want to help. I believe you.
And upon takeoff from Yavin in the cockpit of the U-Wing.
Good.
Good.
None of which is in the final film. Deleted lines from Baze Malbus on Eadu about the destruction of Jedha as he opens up on Imperial troops.
We destroyed our home. I fight the Empire now.
Moves into a deleted introduction between Jyn and K2SO that implies they originally met on Jedha, when in the final movie, K2SO is with them on Yavin before they depart on the mission.
The captain says you are a friend. I will not kill you.
Thanks. There isn't much time. Every day they grow stronger.
Then we're led into more battle shots from the Lost Scarif beach sequences. K2SO spouts odds in a deleted scene before Cassian's deleted response.
There is a 97.6% chance of failure.
He means well.
Shots from the Eadu attack that are actually in the released film, and we get Baze's famous rocket launcher shot at the Walker that does make it into the theatrical release, though I can't help but wonder if these were all shoehorned in to keep something from the expensive beach battle in the final cut. Jyn says to Guerrera,
This is our chance to make a real difference.
As he smiles at her. By now it won't surprise you to hear that both shots and the line are nowhere to be found in the movie we watched. Then Jyn yells, in a deleted moment from their escape from Jedha, ending on the shot of the TIE fighter rising up at the end of the gantry. That would become one of the major smoking guns in the post-release confusion of the content differences between the trailers and the movie itself. And oddly, in the trailer shot, Cassian appears behind Jyn in what otherwise looks like the exact same take. And finally, a tease that Darth Vader will make an appearance in the film as he looks at the Death Star targeting schematic. Yet again, another hint of a scene that never appeared in the movie. The final trailer begins with more actual footage from the film, and then moves into the alternate takes and dialogue department yet again. For example, this shot of Krennic isn't in the final film, and oddly his shuttle has disappeared from where it was sitting behind him in the released cut. Or this establishing shot of Jedha where the effects shots were adjusted yet again for the final film. There's an actual shot of Melshi delivering his line to Jyn rather than the reaction shot over his dialogue in the finished movie.
You wanna get out of here? You wanna get out of here?
And then we're right back into the Rebel Command interrogation with more dialogue that isn't in the final production.
Our rebellion is all that remains to push back the Empire.
When was the last time you were in contact with your father? When was the last time you were in contact with your father?
What is this? What is this?
And more shots of Krennic that aren't in the final cut. Jyn tells Cassian in an alternate version of the scene after their escape from Jedha that her father must be found.
If my father built this thing, we need to find him.
He did build it.
Then we'll find him.
And another major alternate take here is Krennic discussing the power of the Death Star with Vader.
The power that we are dealing with here is immeasurable.
Rather than on Mustafar, where Krennic had his scene with Vader in the theatrical cut. Even the shots of the Rebel briefing about the Death Star use alternate compositions. And we also get a deleted line from Chirrut before their departure from Yavin, or possibly their arrival at Scarif.
Take hold of this moment. The Force is strong.
More alternate footage that isn't in the film.
Make 10 men feel like 100. Make 10 men feel like 100.
The final major shot of Saw Gerrera is confusing as hell because his line is the take from the film.
Save the rebellion! Save the dream! Save the rebellion! Save the dream!
But the trailer reveals that in the final cut of the movie, they ended up flipping Whitaker's head and then swapped his shoulder armor so he would be looking frame left instead of right. However, the giveaway is Whitaker's drooping eye, which is his left eye and is closest to the metal shoulder plate in the film. Until this shot. They shot it with Whitaker looking to the left, then decided they needed him looking to the right for the flow of the action as Jyn and Cassian escape the building. And despite all of the reshoots, of which we have to assume Guerrera with hair was part of that, given the heavy implication the original footage was of him bald, they apparently got this angle wrong, requiring them to horizontally flip the entire shot and then digitally reverse his armor to mask a continuity error in the final film. It's baffling to see just how much of this film wasn't in the market marketing over and over again. All one can say is the general plot is outlined in the advertising, but the characterizations, story flow, even locations are all misrepresented to an extent I can't recall seeing in any other promotional rollout for a major film. Reconstructing the original version of Rogue One with certainty is all but impossible. While Tony Gilroy did confirm Gareth Edwards had finished his first cut of the film before he arrived on the picture, other factors make definitive statements about the exact content of the original cut unreasonable. Actor Ben Mendelsohn, who played Krennic, confirmed on the original shoot Edwards would have the actors perform each scene multiple ways, which implies not just different inflections, but likely different dialogue choices each time as well. The result, according to Mendelsohn, is the potential for enormously different renderings. In other words, the possibility of many versions of the film. Edwards himself admitted he liked to take a few minutes each day and just shoot random visuals that he didn't necessarily intend to be in the final movie, shots that ended up being crack rock for the marketing department as they clearly had carte blanche to construct the film's trailers. However, beyond Edwards' self-indulgent captures were the miles and miles of alternate scene reads and angles, all of which ended up in the hands of the marketing people.
May the Force be with us. May the Force be with us. May the Force be with us.
And then you add the reshot footage on top of all that, and you have a situation where the executives are still figuring out what kind of movie they want, so it's only natural the marketing team has no guidance on what footage will represent the film best in advertising. So they ended up promoting a very different movie from what landed in theaters. There are tons of trailers, TV spots, promo reels, and featurettes for Rogue One, and all of them are filled with either alternate footage and deleted scenes, or they are tantalizing behind-the-scenes hints at what the original version of Rogue One entailed. We only know a few things for certain about the reshoots. We know the introductions of Cassian, grown-up Jyn, and Bodhi were all done in the reshoot phase, and we know the Darth Vader scene at the end of the film was added in the reshoots as well. We can be tentatively certain K2SO's introduction in the film was originally on Jedha from brief footage in the trailers. We know Forrest Whitaker's Saw Guerrera was completely reshot, as originally he was the bald version of the character we're more familiar with from Clone Wars, but his final version is visibly changed. And we know the battle on Scarif at the end was reworked extensively, as the beach set piece is barely present in the final film when compared to the promotional materials. Given the massive pile of footage we were accidentally shown by the marketing department in all of these trailers, and thanks to the internet's existence allowing us to see all of the international ads as well, there's a sizable amount of video and audio to work from, like fragments of a broken statue, along with a precious few still photos from the original shoot as well. However, despite this surprising amount to work with, considering Disney's otherwise tight-lipped policy on alternate cuts of their films, the best we can manage is a guess. If we rely on the theatrical cut as a basic guide, the original version of the film began with a young Jyn Erso running home as Krennic's shuttle arrived in the atmosphere ahead of Galen's escape preparations. It's also been speculated, due to a land speeder prop built for the location but never seen on screen, that Galen's original introduction in the film might have been him working underneath the vehicle and then getting out from under it at the sound of the shuttle overhead. And just as likely, much of the dialogue between Galen and Krennic would have played differently with alternate reaction shots. Now, this does not mean this scene was necessarily reshot, given Edwards' penchant for shooting many versions of lines and exchanges in principal photography, so keep that in mind. Krennic would kill Galen's wife and then, unseen in the final film, burn down their homestead. Jyn would be rescued by Saw Gerrera as seen in the film, as he is bald in these brief shots in the opening of the movie, indicating original principal photography. From here, the first cut appears to deviate in major ways from the final. The theatrical introductions of Jyn, Cassian, Bodhi, and possibly K2SO were done in the reshoots. Remember that Edwards' first cut was a work print cut effectively, and given that reshoots are always accounted for in such big-budget Hollywood films, it's very possible some of the scenes filmed during the reshoot phase would have been done regardless of the extensive mandates from Disney executives. In other words, even in an alternate universe where Tony Gilroy was not brought on board to rework the entire story of the film, Edwards might still have potentially added some of these scenes in reshoots to the final theatrical cut, or versions of them. So while these character introductions are confirmed as part of the reshoot process, something like them might have been part of a more standard reshoot and pickup schedule for Rogue One without Gilroy and the executive meddling. This begs the question as to how the original cut transitioned from childhood Jyn to Felicity Jones, as the scenes of her in prison and her rescue from the labor camp were shot after principal photography. Very likely after the opening titles, the movie would show us Jyn as an adult in handcuffs in a cell on Yavin, before being led to Rebel Command where we are introduced to Cassian Andor for the first time, alongside Mon Mothma, General Draven, and General Merrick. Admittedly, this would feel abrupt for modern moviegoers, but for anyone used to World War II mission movies like The Dirty Dozen, The Guns of Navarone, or Where Eagles Dare, characters need even less exposition.
Our job is to get inside there and get him out as soon as possible, before they have a chance to get the information from him.
Captain Andor's mission is to authenticate the pilot's story and then, if possible, find your father.
We're hoping that he will help us locate your father and return him to the Senate for testimony.
Or I should say, you get him out.
What about paratroops? What we need is someone who gets us through the door without being killed.
You're all rebels, aren't you?
You probably noticed that Lieutenant Schaefer wears the shoulder flashes of the American Ranger Division. I think that speaks for itself.
This is Captain Cassian Andor, Rebel Intelligence.
I think that speaks for itself.
Forgery of Imperial documents. Possession of unsanctioned weapons. Aggravated assault. Escape from custody. Resisting arrest.
I think that speaks for itself.
Rogue One was clearly taking a lot of inspiration from war films like these. In the dialogue we hear both in the deleted lines and in the final film, they read out her litany of crimes against the Empire, and General Draven delivers all of the classic war film rhetoric, such as,
"Can you be trusted without your shackles?"
and,
"We're up against the clock here, girl, so if there's nothing to talk about, we'll just put you back where we found you."
World War II mission movies, particularly the ones where less than ideal soldiers were chosen for the assignment, were all about giving you just enough information about the character to understand why they would take the raw deal being handed to them, because the alternative was far less appealing. Right from the off, the original version of Jyn Erso was far closer to Snake Plissken from Escape from New York than a Luke Skywalker or Rey kind of Star Wars saga hero. This first version of Jyn seems to have been a notorious insurgent fighter against the Empire, and not counted in the rebellion's ranks, but once a top name within Saw Gerrera's terrorist cell.
You are already the best soldier in my cadre.
State your name for the record.
Jyn Erso.
Forgery of Imperial documents. Possession of stolen property. Aggravated assault.
I was trained to fight, not to stand down.
Can you be trusted without your shackles?
Let's just get this over with, shall we?
On your own from the age of 15. Reckless, aggressive, and undisciplined.
Her entire persona in the deleted lines is a completely different performance. It's sharper and more cynical, rather than simply the guarded and indifferent Jyn from the theatrical cut. In potential alternate versions of this crucial scene, Cassian is more of a standard interrogator, while Mon Mothma does the heavy lifting explaining the discovery of the Death Star project. Whereas in the theatrical cut, Cassian plays bad cop most of the time.
We have a mission for you. We have intercepted a coded Imperial transmission. It indicates that a major weapons test is imminent. We need to know what it is and how to destroy it.
So why me?
The message was sent by your father.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
In a lot of the alternate lines, Jyn is more assertive and confident. She comes off less rattled and more a veteran of these types of interrogations, playing with the rebel commanders. Even an alternate take of the line most of the fanboys hated really shows a version of Jyn that stands in stark contrast to her final incarnation.
This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel. This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel. This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel. I rebel. I rebel.
And most importantly, it's a version of Jyn that Cassian finds immediately amusing. Cassian, from every indication, is not so distrustful of her that he's going to become her adversary right out of the gate. To the extent that he's the one revealing to Jyn the message that was sent to the Alliance was done so by her father.
We have intercepted a coded Imperial transmission.
So why me?
The message was sent by your father. The pilot says he was sent by your father.
This is an important distinction. In the original version of the film, the Alliance has already received a coded transmission from Galen Erso, and they are seeking Saw Gerrera's help not for the message itself, as they already have it, but to find out where her father is being held so they can retrieve him and get the information they need to find the Death Star's weakness. As is also evident, the choice to make Cassian antagonistic toward Jyn happened in the reshoots. I assume to give the film contrived interpersonal drama. Meanwhile, the breadcrumbs of the original version indicate strongly a more logical character dynamic where Cassian can see Jin lived a life similar to his own, being raised as an insurgent fighter and very resistant to authority. With the orders to go to Jedha, Jin and Cassian grab their gear and head out of the Yavin temple onto the tarmac where the U-Wing fighter awaits. Cassian is then pulled aside by General Draven, leaving Jin to board on her own. You'll note she's already wearing her blaster on her hip, holstered in broad daylight, and was walking right alongside Cassian. Inside the U-Wing, in the theatrical cut, she meets K2SO, who will shortly co-pilot the ship with Cassian. She takes her bag off her shoulder and begins rummaging through it for something. Cassian returns as she's pulling a blaster out of the bag, a blaster that moments ago was in a holster on her leg.
Why does she get a blaster and I don't?
K2SO calls her out for it, and Cassian tries to demand the blaster back in another moment of Cassian distrusting Jin. However, deleted footage shows Jin in the co-pilot seat of the U-Wing taking off in a brief exchange with Cassian.
Good.
Good.
Where it appears they're establishing some trust, and K2SO is not present. Granted, this footage is brief, but other trailer footage shows K2SO meeting Jin in the alleyways of Jedha after the Stormtrooper fight, which would suggest K2SO is already embedded and waiting for them on that planet.
The captain says you are a friend. I will not kill you.
Thanks.
Everything about this scene as is feels like they reshot this to get K2SO into the film earlier after his new but brief introduction on Wobani, but it appears they forgot to refilm all of the shots of Jin and Cassian approaching the U-Wing on the exterior Yavin tarmac, so some original footage ended up getting repurposed, resulting in some curious narrative continuity issues such as Jin's blaster. Some have speculated this behind-the-scenes shot of Alan Tudyk moving cargo in the base is from the beginning of the film, but it's too vague an image to count on as evidence. While more of my mind thinks K2SO didn't originally appear in the film until their arrival on Jedha, I admit there are no certainties here. It's possible K2SO is present on Yavin from the beginning of the film, meets Jin on the U-Wing trip to Jedha, and it's simply blind luck that of all the scores of clips and images that leaked out in the trailers and promos, K2SO's first scenes were simply not among them. But regardless of where K2SO actually showed up in the original cut, and I do believe he did not show up on Yavin, the evidence heavily suggests the scene inside the U-Wing on the Yavin tarmac was reshot, because Jin walks up to the ship wearing a holster with her blaster, but then when she enters the U-Wing, the holster is miraculously gone and the blaster is in her backpack. All of this screams reshoots to reorient Cassian and Jin's characters to create more conflict in the film.
Trust goes both ways.
Jin and Cassian are guided to the city of Jedha by red-robed Bedouin people on camel-like beasts, a nice Lawrence of Arabia moment that is sadly cut from the final movie. Once there, they see a recent skirmish between the Empire and insurgents has resulted in the arrests of multiple fighter pilots. Whether these are actual Alliance pilots is tough to determine. Yes, there are downed X-Wings in the streets of Jedha in the final cut, but there is no clarification that the Alliance has staged any operations of this scale against the Empire up until this point. In fact, characters such as Mon Mothma imply the exact opposite, that rebel action against the Empire has been restrained and focused, and mostly in the shadows.
His militancy has caused the Alliance a great many problems.
General Draven's already blown up an Imperial base.
So contextually, it's more likely these are pilots from Saw Gerrera's insurgency. Either way, they don't make the final cut, so the X-Wings smoldering in the streets of Jedha are just window dressing at this point. As Imperial forces move through the city to secure Jedha from further uprising, Jin helps a little girl retrieve a toy that rolled into the street. She also meets Chirrut Imwe, but in a very different context, reduced to a literal beggar rather than a street fortune teller as in the final cut.
How did you know I was wearing a necklace?
Well, that answer you must pay.
Honestly, I think the former would have been a stronger choice given how he and the other Guardians of the Temple were kicked out into the cold by the Empire. However, the reshoots of Rogue One aimed to change not only the personalities of the main heroes, but also their very introductions. Which means that Baze's introduction, which in the theatrical cut is at the same time as Chirrut's, is likely very different in the original version as well. Guerrera's insurgents attack the Imperial troop convoy, and chaos ensues. This is the point in the film where the trailers seem to indicate K2 K2SO first comes into the story. But I think this is actually the second time she meets him. Visual evidence proves Alan Tudyk was present for the shooting of their scene scouting the city, which they filmed in Jordan during principal photography. However, I believe it plays identically to the final cut, with K2SO not going with them into Jedha, as K2SO's Alan Tudyk is not seen in the images that have surfaced from the camel ride scenes. He instead appears later, though there are several guesses as to exactly how. Frankly, I would prefer K2SO already be embedded in the city. An Imperial droid just wandering in and out of the desert would be a rather conspicuous move. In some form or fashion, Cassian and Jyn run into K2SO in the alleyways of Jedha. There's some debate about whether this happened before or after the fight with the stormtroopers, as Jyn's face isn't bloodied from her street fight with them. However, this production photo shows Jyn in shackles with K2SO behind her, leading to speculation that K2SO rescues Cassian and Jyn after they're arrested by the stormtroopers, who assign them to K2 for processing, not realizing they've just handed our heroes over to a reprogrammed droid. However, I tend to think it's simply a comped-up promo photo using Jyn in shackles from the scene where they see Baze and Chirrut fight the stormtroopers, because the street fight scene is present in the first teaser for the film, and this early introduction of K2SO appears in the subsequent full trailer, clearly showing Jyn without a bloodied face.
I need your help.
We'll follow your lead.
My instinct tells me these two shots are related, where what Jyn thinks is an Imperial droid approaches behind her in the alley, and before she panics, Cassian reveals to K2SO she's a friend, and the droid backs down from seeing her as a threat. Maybe Jyn was behind Cassian and K2SO thought she was sneaking up on him. Or it's another one of those alleged special effects test shots. Again, it's impossible to say for certain. Sadly, I have not been able to identify this doorway in the theatrical cut, and while I have found some that are similar, the control panel of this door is upside down compared to the positions of all the other door panels on Jedha. Also notice how a deleted reaction from Cassian within the same alleyways conveys more camaraderie with Jyn rather than the adversarial Cassian in the final cut.
The captain says you are a friend. I will not kill you.
Thanks.
The deleted lines from K2SO about Cassian identifying her as a friend, so he'll refrain from killing her, could be a straightforward robot logic line, or it's possible, just as in the theatrical cut, there was a near misunderstanding where Jyn almost took the droid out. Behind the scenes footage from the filming shows Tudyk delivering a very different, more serious and urgent line when catching the stormtrooper's grenade.
We cannot stay here. There are a lot of explosions, but two people blending in.
Freeze! Right there!
There's also a line about Imperial forces converging on their location rather than his comical line about blending in.
The Imperial forces are converging on our present location.
However, I suspect this line is pulled from the final act of the film during their infiltration of the data vault on Scarif and simply dropped onto this visual for the trailer. Also, once again, deleted footage of K2SO approaching Jyn reveals a smiling Cassian in the background. This is a guy who isn't trying to keep Jyn Erso under his boot. By now in this analysis, I should address the fact that Bod Rook hasn't been mentioned yet. Bod is one of those blind spots when trying to reconstruct the original cut of Rogue One, in discussing any lost cut of a genre film, but particularly where Rogue One is concerned, it's imperative to distinguish between original concepts versus original cuts. There's much to say about Bodhi's potential role in the original concept for the film, but we'll have to come back to that later. Cassian, Jyn, and K2SO run into Chirrut and Baze once again, where they are probably in the same fight with the stormtroopers, before they are led to Saw's hideout by his fighters. There's a moment here that's a great example of just how insidious the reshoots on this film are, as 2 consecutive shots of Jyn reveal both the reshoot and the original version of the character. But which one is which? I tend to think this second one, without the sand above her vest pockets, is the original shoot, due to the muted color palette, her performance, and overall appearance. The first looks like a pickup, with that more wide-eyed, hesitant interpretation of Jyn. But it's all guesswork.
Can you get us to Saw Guerrera?
Thankfully, we don't have to guess as to which version of Saw Guerrera was first. The original shoot had a Saw Guerrera who was not only bald, but was largely confined to a medical chair, of which some information was doled out in the Rogue One visual guide, where the chair is referred to as a device to remove Geonosian insecticide from his lungs, which would explain why he's using an oxygen mask. There was even a medical droid on hand to assist in these procedures on the original set. It's a pretty specific reference for a plot element that makes no appearance in the film. Fortunately, The Art of Rogue One sheds more light on this piece of the puzzle. Some of the backstory to the events of Rogue One involves the Emperor taking the Death Star project away from the Geonosians before completion and moving it to Eadu, and subsequently attempting to massacre the entire race to hide the Death Star project's existence. Saw Guerrera would investigate this attempted genocide in an episode of Rebels that aired less than a month after the theatrical release of Rogue One. In doing so, he was exposed to the insecticide, is now incapacitated, and undergoing constant medical treatments.
There's not much of me left.
Clearly, the production had initial directives to weave the plot of Rogue One more tightly into Disney's other Star Wars productions at the time. Whether the Geonosian insecticide would have been explicitly explained in dialogue in the original version of the film is impossible to say. Some fans speculated at the time there was once another opening scene to the film showing this investigation on Geonosis and Saw Gerrera being exposed to the poison. But I have serious doubts about that given the airing of the Rebels episode a few weeks after this film's premiere. All we can say is by the time they did the reshoots, all emphasis on the scope of Guerrera's medical condition was removed. And in the few weeks since I finished the Rogue One video, Andor Season 2 has come out and finally answered the question as to why they retconned Saw Gerrera's ailment away from recovering from an illness where he inhaled insecticide. No, they decided they wanted to make him a drug addict. Yeah, he's now basically that guy that's addicted to huffing glue.
I have always loved you.
We know for certain Whitaker's character was bald in the original production, so all of his lines and imagery from that first teaser come into play here, where he's warning Jyn what might happen if she buys into the rebel cause.
What will you do when they catch you? What will you do if they break you? If you continue to fight? What will you become?
Given what the theatrical film tells us about Saw having abandoned her because the Empire was sniffing too close to her true identity as Galen's daughter, when you listen to these original lines from Guerrera, I can't help but wonder if the original character dynamic between Saw and Jyn had less to do with him worried the Empire would find her and more to do with a worry that Jyn would go down a dark path. Obviously baked into the lines is the literal concern about her being captured, handing over everything she knows about the Alliance, and then turned into an Imperial asset. However, it's when you put these lines up as a foil to what Jyn is saying to Guerrera in her deleted dialogue that we start to see this version of Jyn is eager to fight.
There isn't much time. Every day they grow stronger. The Empire's building a weapon. Terrible weapon. Capable of destroying an entire planet. I need your help. It could be the end of us all. This is your chance to make a real difference.
And then when you consider her deleted lines to Mon Mothma and General Draven,
I was trained to fight, not to stand down.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
this is a soldier for whom violence is the default mode. Guerrera didn't ditch her simply because she was Galen's daughter. Guerrera and his faction are, by Mon Mothma's own words, infamous extremists. And yet here's Guerrera telling Jyn to her face that he's worried about what she'll become if she continues to fight, while she's saying with barely restrained exuberance that going after this Death Star could really bloody the nose of the Empire.
This is your chance to make a real difference.
It's very important to consider once again that a very different Jyn Erso is interacting with a very different Guerrera in this first cut of Rogue One. In the theatrical cut, she's non-committal, resentful, and subdued until Guerrera shows her the message from her father about the Death Star. However, in this original version, Jyn is the one telling Saw about the Death Star and how much is at stake. She implores him to help them locate her father to finally seize an opportunity to bring the Empire to its knees. I'm certain at this point Jyn watches a message from her father. How it differs from the message Galen got through to the Alliance is impossible to say. There are claims Galen's nickname for Jyn, Stardust, was all added in reshoots, which would mean Galen's entire hologram message might have been reshot as well. And that's very likely given that the Alliance in the theatrical cut no longer gets a message from him. Either way, Jyn doesn't forget to grab the message chip in the original cut. Meanwhile, Jyn's companions are in Guerrera's prison cells, and this is where we have to discuss Bod Rook. Unfortunately, we know more conceptually about early ideas for Bod Rook than we do regarding his filmed content in the original cut. His name wasn't even Bodhi in the earliest drafts of the screenplay. At one point, he was a longtime Imperial prisoner of Saw Guerrera, an engineer named Boken, who had gone mad and ended up working for Guerrera in some techno-scientist capacity or something, and was integral to finding the Death Star's weakness. Before shooting began, his entire character was changed to Bod Rook, an Imperial cargo pilot that had no relationship with Guerrera, but was instead trying to find him on behalf of Galen Erso. We know his origin scene in the deserts of Jedha with Guerrera's men was added in the reshoots, but beyond that, there isn't much visibility into the original way he came into the story. It has been revealed conceptually that the boar gullet monster was not initially used on Bodhi, but instead used on Jyn Erso. However, this gets back to what I was saying about conceptually versus actual original filming. Sinister as it would have been for a paranoid Saw Guerrera to subject the girl he raised to that monster to ensure she wasn't deceiving him, it is certainly in line with the tone set by the earlier version of him we see in the teaser.
Did you come here to kill me?
However, there is no evidence such a scene was ever shot. Similarly, no concrete evidence has surfaced of Bodhi's original introduction into the film. If Bodhi was on Jedha in the original version of the film and captured by the first version of Saw Gerrera, it might have been markedly different in key areas, such as the possible omission of the boar gullet. Or it might have been pretty much the same. The only thing we can say for certain is Bodhi's scenes with Saw Gerrera in the finished film were part of the reshoots. But if they were new scenes, or if they were reshot versions of old scenes, is impossible to confirm. In fact, the only images of Bodhi that we can be certain were from the early shoot are of him with Jyn on Yavin during the original version of the Rebel briefing before the final battle on Scarif. And because of the absence of any other materials, it opens up the scant possibility that the original version of Bodhi didn't show up in the film until the planning for the final battle. And admittedly, that doesn't seem plausible. Actor Riz Ahmed stated Bodhi was a native of Jedha in his early character development. I don't think he'd have crafted this idea of the character if all of his scenes had taken place after the Jedha sequences. Based on lack of evidence, I'm erring on the bet that Bodhi in the original shoot was introduced in the cells in Guerrera's hideout. However, we don't have any evidence of Bodhi in any of the photos of the original version of Guerrera, so we can't say for certain. But enough about Bodhi. For now. Unfortunately, in orbit over Jedha, the Death Star is ready to destroy the City of the Wills.
What you will see today is only a fraction of our full power.
Now, somewhere in this sequence of events, there were scenes in the original production of Director Krennic on the Death Star itself with Darth Vader. There has been some speculation these lost scenes with Darth Vader were filmed as insurance just in case the digital Tarkin didn't fly. However, we have no way of confirming that theory, and we know Tarkin and Krennic confronted each other on a Star Destroyer in the final cut prior to their verbal spat on the Death Star. With no footage of Vader and Krennic on a Star Destroyer having surfaced, I'm hesitant to support the theory that Vader's scenes were mere insurance against a janky Tarkin effect. Suffice to say, Krennic gives Vader the hard sell on the Death Star's awesomeness. I mean, that's literally what he says. I'm not kidding.
The power that we are dealing with is awesome. Awesome.
Also of note is that during Krennic's encounter with Tarkin on the Death Star, the director loses it to such an extent there was a version of the scene where he draws down on the Grand Moff in front of the entire Imperial contingent. Again, it must be remembered that multiple versions of many scenes were shot in principal photography in addition to possible reshoots, so while this scene isn't guaranteed to have made it into Edward's first cut, it did exist nonetheless. There's a claim by a number of fans that this is where Vader's scenes would have come into the film, as Vader force rips the blaster out of Krennic's hand and tells everyone to leave the room, so he can have a private discussion with the director. Some behind-the-scenes photographs are held up as evidence for this. I guess it's plausible this was the case, and that they reshot the ending of Krennic and Tarkin's encounter to be more subdued. Krennic drawing on Tarkin wouldn't have resulted in Vader's understanding or mercy. Given the scenes on Mustafar happen as a result of Krennic's anger toward Tarkin, I have to believe the Mustafar scenes were reshoots in some fashion. Otherwise, why would Vader follow Krennic all the way back from the Death Star to Mustafar for yet another brief discussion?
My apologies. You do have a great many things to explain.
A bigger shift away from the theatrical cut occurs after Jyn and Saw watch the destruction of Jedha from outside his hideout in the original footage, and the heroes narrowly escape in the U-Wing without Saw, with yet again a more active, less passive Jyn Erso.
Go, 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 go!
This is where a major change from the theatrical cut likely occurs. In this version, it is doubtful Cassian and Jyn argue about forgetting to grab Galen's message, because, remember, they simply needed Saw's intel on where Galen was being held, and photographic evidence heavily suggests Jyn did see a message on Jedha from her father in the original cut, but had the presence of mind to retain the message chip rather than forgetting it. But more on that later.
We can stop them.
It should also be noted that during their journey to Eadu, character development of Chirrut and Baze was expanded upon, but sadly removed in the final cut. Chirrut can feel the destruction of Jedha as they escape, pressing his hand on the glass window of the U-Wing. And upon arriving at Eadu, Chirrut prays to the Force, though specifically about what is unknown. Baze's character was also more fleshed out in the original version, as more of his jaded abandonment in his faith in the Force is brought to light. And there's even speculation his character was a man claiming stolen valor. Rumors based on vague statements in interviews suggest Baze lied that he was a hero of the Clone Wars, but it comes out in the final act of the film that he never was a soldier, but he finds his courage and his faith in the Force, redeeming his life of stolen valor by fighting at the Battle of Scarif. If these speculations are true, Baze's character might have been inspired by Toshiro Mifune's role in Seven Samurai, a poser who proves his bravery in the end. Beyond that, there isn't much we can pin down. Unfortunately, the Eadu sequence of Rogue One is the biggest blind spot in information on the original version of the film. Some sources say in this original cut, the rebels take a stolen Imperial cargo shuttle to Eadu, but I've come to the conclusion that theory is mere fanwank, as there's no production evidence to support that, and just enough to refute it. There are no indications that the heroes returned to Yavin from Jedha in the original cut of the film, and certainly no proof the Imperial cargo shuttle was ever acquired prior to their arrival on Eadu. In fact, the concept production paintings of the Eadu sequences all show different iterations of the U-Wing fighter, which means that ship was used in that scene from the very beginning. Early versions of the script had the U-Wing crash on a moon where Saw Guerrera was hiding, while later versions had the U-Wing covertly land safely on Eadu using special scanning equipment to avoid the cliffs. Eventually, it seems the scene evolved into a hybrid of the two ideas, where the U-Wing crashes on the surface of Eadu. According to the writers, the crash was added as an excuse to get them into the Imperial shuttle they would use for the final mission. However, there is still some speculation that the original version of the arrival on Eadu did not involve a crash, and was instead the stealth landing seen in the concept artwork, being more in line with a covert mission, as it's very strange the Imperial facility isn't alerted to the crash of a large starship in the area in the final film. Suffice to say, because the entire Eadu sequence is a massive fog where the original cut of Rogue One is concerned, all we can say is that, as in the final version, Galen Erso is killed and Krennic escapes, while Baze makes it clear he's taking revenge for the destruction of Jedha.
We destroyed our home. I fight the Empire now.
All paths have become one.
And there was also a deleted action moment where the rebel bomb destroys the platform between Jyn and her father, so she's forced to make a dangerous jump to reach him in his dying moments. We know that on some level, one of the objectives of the reshoots was to heighten the interpersonal drama between the characters, and in doing so, they altered the personalities of Cassian and Jyn markedly. And we can be reasonably sure the interiors of the U-Wing and the cargo shuttle were standing sets that were reutilized during the reshoot process, if the blaster continuity gaffe during K2SO's reintroduction is any indication. The plot point involving General Draven countermanding Mon Mothma behind her back and opting to murder Galen is really stupid, because in the final film you have the rebels verifying the use of the Death Star on Jedha, yet immediately Draven implies they have to kill Galen before he can finish what he's building for the Empire, which makes you want to yell at Draven through the screen to get a clue. They just told him the weapon is finished and in use, so he needs Galen alive more than ever, but nah, he's gonna push ahead with assassination.
Weapon confirmed. Jedha destroyed. Tell him my orders still stand.
This is the kind of plot point that feels more like something Gilroy would have written into the revisions for Rogue One to create a lot of tension between Cassian and Jyn. And actor Alistair Petrie, who played General Draven, said in an interview that the line,
"You find him, you kill him,"
was a late addition to the script that he received a few days before shooting the scene with Diego Luna at the airbase. However, I can't say for certain it was a scene added for the reshoots. The question from the interviewer regarded the entire scene, but Petrie only mentions the end of the line, explicitly stating to kill Galen. However, he could be indicating the entire scene was new, which, if that's the case, once again begs the question, was this a scene added during principal photography, or was it a Tony Gilroy addition in reshoots to create that spark of conflict between Cassian and Jyn throughout the film?
We have to kill Galen Erso while we have the chance.
I feel like there's a chance Cassian was not originally given a direct order to kill Galen, but upon crashing on Eadu and Rebel Command losing contact with them, Draven would then give the order to the X-Wing squadrons to destroy the facility since it's possible the extraction mission has failed. Unfortunately, honesty demands we can't go on feelings when there are no facts to back them up. As frustrating as it is to acknowledge, there's no way to confirm if the Yavin hangar set was retained at Cardington Air Station when the production ended in February 2016. Only to resume with reshoots in June, which is a long time to retain a set that large. I looked for confirmation of the timeline the production used the airship hangars, but was met with zilch. We know they returned to Pinewood Studios for reshoots, so I think it's a certainty they retained the shuttle and U-wing interiors and various other interior sets in the intervening months. For example, we know they had to comp up a good portion of the hangar interior again, so Cassian's scene with the commandos could be reshot as he tells Jyn in the final cut,
"I believe you."
Given that, there's a strong argument to be made they retained the Yavin hangar set at the air station, but there isn't definitive proof. But with this short scene between Cassian and Draven having been confirmed as a late entry into the production, and being cut into the same place as Jyn's blaster scene on the U-Wing and the new introduction of K2SO, I'm starting to lean toward all of this content about the kill order and Jyn's blaster being a Gilroy reshoot to create that interpersonal drama between Jyn and Cassian he wanted, as well as his intent to make Cassian a more conflicted character with inner demons that he has gone on to explore more with the Andor television series. The scenes of Draven giving his orders to Cassian via radio transmission and approving the launch of the Rebel fighters to attack Eadu are inside Yavin Rebel Command. As we'll see later in the film, this Yavin War Room set, made famous in the original Star Wars, was, by Petrie's own admission, retained for continual reshoots of Scene 16, which was Jyn's interrogation. And Petrie has said they were reshooting that scene even a year after production began on the film. However, they did not reshoot the Rebel briefing on that set, but built an entirely new environment to reshoot that part of the movie. While we will go into more detail later, what's important to understand here is this Rebel briefing where Jyn gives her impassioned speech before they depart for Scarif is a reshoot with a new set, allowing for a larger group of characters to occupy the space. The central table is completely different, and none of the trademark Rebel light panels are anywhere to be seen. And as we've established, the degree and scale of the reshoots was unexpected, as Tony Gilroy was brought onto the picture to manage the rewrites and final edit. You'll notice Draven's line about killing Galen while they have the chance begins in audio over the existing scene, and ends on an isolated shot of Draven on profile.
We have no idea what he's building for the Empire. We have to kill Galen Erso while we have the chance.
The only shot like that in the scene. In other words, this line could be a pickup in reshoots just as easily as it might have been part of the original scene. But since the kill order line was added late in the game in one area, and possibly that entire scene, it's plausible it was added in the other scene as well. Like so many things about Rogue One's production, the answer is a coin toss. Maybe they did leave the Yavin tarmac set standing at Cardington Airship Station for a few months to film pickups between Cassian and Draven. But if they did so, why the continuity screw-up with Jyn's blaster? And even more damning, why the obvious problem later in the film when, almost immediately after Rebel Command tells Jyn they won't sanction a mission to Scarif, Cassian and Jyn walk out onto the tarmac as every Rebel pilot and crew person around them is scrambling and running at a sprint to their fighters. Why scramble when you've just been told you're standing down? The point is, this shot of the pilots scrambling as our heroes depart for Scarif is yet another indicator the Yavin exterior set was not retained for reshoots, and the filmmakers had to work with the footage they'd already shot to patch into the reworked final cut. Otherwise, they would have redone these bits to match up with their new story flow, wouldn't they? Where were we? Oh, right. Krennic is standing in the rain, as usual. Cassian by now would have gotten his orders one way or another to kill Galen Erso, and Jyn is trying to reach her father in a torrential downpour. Rebel fighters swoop in, Galen dies, and the heroes escape on the stolen Imperial cargo shuttle. And it's super convenient there was one sitting there ready to steal when such a small, hidden facility likely wouldn't have such standing resources and was apparently completely without any hangar security. At this point, Cassian and Jyn have their heated argument about Draven's secret orders that got her father killed. Unfortunately, there seems to be no alternate footage of these moments to indicate any differences in this scene theatrically as compared to the original shoot. Once again, Eadu refuses to give up any principal photography secrets. After this point in the story, things get really interesting in terms of the original version of Rogue One. While it's not clear how, Jyn returns with the message from her father that specifies he engineered the flaw in the Death Star that will allow it to self-destruct if hit. Unlike the theatrical cut, where this message was given to Saw Guerrera by Bod Rook and then stupidly forgotten in the race to get away from Jedha, also the rewrites have the freedom to make the Rebel Alliance and Cassian look like even bigger assholes later on. The original meeting with the Rebel commanders took place in the classic Yavin War Room, where Jyn, Bodhi, and I assume Cassian as well, explain to the Alliance leadership the situation and also, very likely, play them Galen's message. Jyn and the others are then asked to wait outside at some point while Command comes to a decision on the Scarif assault, which likely explains this image of Jyn with the message chip. We can be certain the Rebel briefing in the final film was reshot on this new set because Mon Mothma and Bail Organa leave the meeting from the original Yavin War Room. Jumping back a few minutes, we have Jyn waiting outside for Rebel Command's decision. There's been some speculation regarding a deleted scene where Mon Mothma leaves the meeting briefly to find Jyn and apologize to her for the death of her father. However, the scant photo evidence some identify as proof is inconclusive. But it does raise the more important issue. How exactly did the original version of Rogue One justify Jyn Erso's willingness to continue to fight the Empire on behalf of the rebellion after they ordered the killing of her father? The theatrical cut does a deplorable job of making that transition, having Jyn go from obstinate to hopeful to indifferent to verklempt to furious to righteous all in the span of 90 minutes. Theatrical Jyn has absolutely no reason to like or help the Rebel Alliance, but the plot says she has to, even after they kill her dad. If we assume the sequence of events on Eadu is largely unchanged between the first cut and the theatrical cut, then it's possible the original Jyn Erso, not the theatrical version, has a slightly more logical path to leading the attack on Scarif. The theatrical cut expects us to accept the simple motivation of daddy issues, where Jyn goes from not giving a crap to a crusader on a dime because her father asked her to. With the original version of Jyn, we have a character who was such a fighter she didn't even join the Rebel Alliance. She was part of the edgier off-brand rebellion led by Saw Gerrera.
I was trained to fight, not to stand down. They wanted an introduction, they've got it. I'm out now.
And ultimately, even he cut her loose because of his own concerns about her zeal as a soldier.
What will you do when they catch you? What will you do if they break you? If you continue to fight? What will you become?
So let's consider that Cassian's more amenable persona from the original cut is given those orders by Draven to kill Jyn's father. With Cassian having more camaraderie with Jyn in the original version of the film, his hesitancy to carry out the assassination makes far more sense.
There's an Alliance squadron approaching. Clear the area. No!
So where does that leave this incarnation of Jyn Erso in the wake of her father's murder? Well, as small a blessing as it might sound, there is a rumor that her father's killer, General Draven, supported the attack on Scarif in the original version of Rogue One. Mind you, it's a rumor, but it does have some merit. Petrie did say the line about explicitly killing Galen was not part of the original shooting script he was working from, and photos have surfaced supporting many official descriptions of Draven and General Merrick as having an adversarial relationship within the rebellion's command structure. Apparently there was a scene where Merrick was furious that Draven was committing his U-Wing crews to the Scarif assault for deploying the rebel commandos on the planet's surface, claiming Draven was throwing away their lives. Much like Jyn and Cassian, it very much sounds like the original version of Draven was far more consistent and interesting a character. Speaking of consistency, despite a lot of speculation that the original version of Rogue One had the Alliance agree to attack Scarif, most of the evidence suggests this plot point plays the same way between both versions of the film. The rebel leaders begin to bicker.
If it's war you want, you'll fight alone.
The Empire has the means of mass destruction. The rebellion does not.
What reason would my father have to lie?
To lure our forces into a final battle to destroy us once and for all.
Without the full support of the Council, the odds are too great.
We need to surrender.
And support for the attack quickly fades. Jyn and Bodhi leave the meeting, possibly at Mon Mothma's request, so the leaders can deliberate further. Outside in the hangar, Cassian, the commandos, and the rebel pilots wait for the Alliance leaders to emerge and give their decision on Scarif. Around this time, Jyn would have her moment of reflection holding the message chip. The Alliance brass gather with the troops in the hangar and call off the attack. You'll notice the only principal character in this scene is Cassian. K2, Baze, Chirrut, and Bodhi are not present for this assembly, and most notably, both Jyn and Mon Mothma are not here. This is where in the theatrical cut we would have witnessed the scene between Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, where he says he's going to inform the Senate that there will be no peace with the Imperial government, and Mon Mothma then asks him to contact Ben Kenobi. I have to assume this would be when Mon Mothma apologizes to Jyn for the death of her father as she left the war room ahead of Draven and Merrick. The rest of the Alliance backs down from their responsibility not far away, as the same assholes from the reshoot briefing who pushed back against the mission leave the hangar assembly ahead of everyone else gathered there, while Draven and Merrick argue with each other over the operation that isn't happening. I get the sense this was all reshot to consolidate the entire scene from 2 locations into one for the final cut, where the entire crowd is in one place, so the leadership disagreement and the knowledge the attack isn't going ahead all happen at the same time without any waiting. I'm not gonna say this is my preference, but it is very typical Star Wars. That said, I would have preferred the original way this played out. With the rebels throwing in the towel, Jyn likely steels herself for what she has to do and goes to speak with Bodhi, Baze, and Chirrut. There's a deleted scene where Jyn explains her intentions to the 2 Guardians about going to Scarif without the Alliance's help, and having a conversation similar to the deleted dialogue from the reshoots, where Baze is asking her how many commandos she thinks she needs for the mission, to which Jyn asks Chirrut if he's with her on this.
Are you with me?
Some additional lines from Baze were also revealed in various trailers. However, these appear to be deleted lines from the reshoots.
She wants to fight.
I go where he goes.
Given that Bodhi was with Jyn in both versions of the Scarif briefing scene, his involvement on Jyn's team is almost automatic. You can see Jyn rummaging in her bag during the discussion with Baze, which is also present in the shot where she asks Chirrut if he's on board, so these 2 elements are from the same scene. And while it's tough to be certain, it looks like Bodhi is in the background behind Baze, based on the vest and coveralls you can make out. And in a bit of dialogue I really wish was still in the movie, Jyn accepts their help and welcomes them into the rebellion.
Welcome to the rebellion, soldiers.
Which really would have been a cool line, because the actual rebellion has just tucked tail. So not only are they rebelling against the Empire in this moment, they're also rebelling against the Alliance. This may be where the mystery shot of K2SO comes into play. K2 could be watching them walk by or hearing their conversation, as the set dressings behind K2 look like he's in the same area of the hangar. The newly formed team heads out of the temple, probably to steal the shuttle, and this has to be when Cassian, likely ticked off at the Alliance for backing down, confronts Jyn about her plan. The more important question is, how does this version of the film bring reconciliation between Jyn and Cassian? In the theatrical version, she's mad at him over her father, and when the rebel briefing was reshot, Cassian was initially in the scene and then later digitally removed, which makes no sense given the theatrical cut has Mon Mothma identify him as the Alliance's head of intelligence.
This is Captain Cassian Andor, Rebel Intelligence.
So in the theatrical cut, when he approaches Jyn and tells her the rebels would never have believed her, it's like they might have if the head of Rebel Intelligence had been there to back her up.
You dumb son of a bitch!
This is yet another example of the Gilroy rewrites mucking up the works. Not only do the rewrites brand the rebellion as contentious and craven, had Cassian remained in the reshot scene, it would have made even less sense why the rebel commanders would refuse to act.
Weapon confirmed. Jedha destroyed. Tell him my orders still stand.
You dumb son of a bitch!
The rewrites have created their own conundrum. Put Cassian in the scene as the intelligence officer and the rebels look twice as stupid refusing to assault Scarif. Remove Cassian from the scene and you wonder why the head of rebel intelligence, who had first-hand knowledge of the capabilities of the Death Star, isn't present for the most pivotal decision in the history of the Alliance. The simple answer is it was another opportunity for a contrived emotional beat to allow Cassian to dramatically appear and say to Jyn, "They don't believe in you, but I do." Which is also completely stupid because this entire film, Cassian has made it very clear he doesn't trust a lick of what Jyn says at every turn. And now suddenly his theatrical version is like, "I believe you now, because the plot said I had to." This wouldn't have been the case in the original cut of the film. Yes, I freely admit Cassian was likely also missing from the main hangar briefing in the original cut as he's sitting outside in the hangar. And it makes as little sense in that respect as it does in the final version. But the reason I'm dunking more on the theatrical version in this regard is because we know they did have Cassian in their reshoot of the meeting. They fixed the problem and then broke it again. Only this time around, Cassian has been recharacterized as a jerk toward Jyn the entire movie, whereas in the original cut, their only major conflict would have been after Eadu, where Cassian would have likely made it clear, just as in the theatrical cut, that he didn't pull the trigger and he disobeyed orders despite Draven sending the rebel fighters without his knowledge. And also keep in mind, we can't even be sure Draven's kill order was in the original version. That might have been a reshoot, in which case Cassian was ordered to extract Galen, but when they crashed and lost contact with Rebel Command, General Draven executes his contingency plan to destroy Eadu wholesale, which means the burden on Cassian of having to kill Jyn's father wouldn't have been there in the original cut. Possibly.
Clear the area. No!
The more important observation is the original Cassian was not adversarial toward Jyn in addition to being resistant to Draven's kill order of Galen. Therefore, it's more plausible that this original version of Cassian has a way back with this original version of Jyn, compared with the theatrical versions of both characters in the same moment. Original Jyn is a zealous fighter who has made it clear before even seeing her father again in this version of the film that she's ready to take the fight back to the Empire in a major way.
This is your chance to make a real difference.
And after the death of her father, she's very likely hell-bent to carry out his plans at any cost. Because she was not part of the Rebel Alliance, she's ready to swing on Scarif without hesitation. In the deleted footage, Jyn appears understandably wary at first of Cassian's offer. Cassian's role in this original interaction would have been to approach Jyn to tell her he's willing to go with her into the Lion's Den, to confirm he has her back despite what happened on Eadu.
We can do this together. If you're really doing this, I want to help.
And Jyn, considering his words, decides to let this soldier and his team prove themselves with their actions.
I want to help.
Then let's go. Then let's go.
That shot of K2SO could also have been somewhere in here, watching Cassian confront Jyn. Yeah, I know. This shot of K2 could literally be in 100 different places in the film. And that's the point. And now we come to the shot that has caused some to speculate that in the original cut, the rebels don't refuse to attack Scarif to get the Death Star plans. The observation some people have made is that the rebels have refused the mission, yet suddenly everyone is scrambling for battle. This argument can be fueled further by the scene from the original war room that survived into the final cut, where Mon Mothma and Bail Organa leave the rebel briefing, and Bail says he has to inform his people there will be no peace. Not only are they leaving from the wrong briefing room, evidence that this scene was from the original cut of the film, but Bail's words somewhat contradict what just occurred. The rebels have decided to stand down, but Bail and Mon Mothma decide to prepare for war. Then you have the footage of the rebels all gathered in the hangar with a number of the rebel leaders. Based on all of this, it's easy to jump to the conclusion they're waiting for the attack plan, as has happened in so many other Star Wars films by now. I wish this were the case. I hate the Alliance's actions in this film. They make no sense to me. I want to tell you the original cut has a braver rebellion. Unfortunately, I don't think it does. This shot of the rebels scrambling in large numbers behind Jyn and Cassian, a version of which is ultimately used for the final cut, is visually contradictory with what just occurred. But I don't think it's definitive proof the original cut of Rogue One has the Alliance supporting the mission. When Bail and Mon Mothma leave the original war room, their exchange begins with,
"Despite what the others say, war is inevitable."
Yes, I agree.
As thin as their rationale in this scene is about war versus peace, the dialogue indicates the rebels are backing down for now. Jyn wouldn't be asking Chirrut if he's with her on this if she already had the support of the rebel army. And this early version of the scene with Jyn and Cassian has him saying,
"If you're really doing this, I want to help."
That doesn't sound like someone who's just been given permission to do a thing. Sounds more like someone who's about to do something crazy and the other person is saying, if you're really about to do this insane thing, let me help you. I want in. You'll also notice in the reshot version of this encounter, there are still tons of rebels running around like there's a fire somewhere, even though the big mission has just been nixed. We could make the thinnest of arguments they did this so the energy of their reshot scene would match up somewhat with the original shot of them walking out of the temple, but I just don't think they'd go to that kind of trouble. I think they simply felt the rebel base should always feel like a high-alert location, without realizing how it would look against a cowed rebellion. I'm forced to face the likelihood that the original cut of Rogue One also had the Alliance refusing to get the plans, Jyn stealing the shuttle, and Admiral Raddus still being a massive idiot. I have no problem with the idea that Jyn would defy the Alliance. That makes sense. It's the Alliance bitching out that hurts the film's credibility, where emotional contrivance wins out over plausible action. And all of this is ultimately put to rest with Bodhi naming the team Rogue One and stealing the shuttle right off the Alliance landing pad. Why would Bodhi have a scene where he's trying to deceive Rebel air traffic control if the Alliance is already committed to attacking Scarif? There is an alternate take when Jyn enters the shuttle where she names the team.
Welcome to Rogue One.
However, that shot really feels like reshoot Jyn Erso in appearance and performance, and as some have speculated, might just be a line for the marketing. Meanwhile, the line they actually used, where Jyn says,
"May the Force be with us,"
is far more like original Jyn Erso. And the footage of Bodhi naming the team Rogue One also contains a performance from Felicity Jones that is more in line with the original version of the character. Jin's speech to the commandos might have included supporting dialogue from Chirrut.
"Take hold of this moment. The Force is strong."
While K2SO provided abysmal odds of their survival, with Cassian apologizing for his defeatist friend.
There is a 97.6% chance of failure.
He means well.
Shots have surfaced behind the scenes that show Cassian piloting the Imperial shuttle, while Alan Tudyk in K2SO's motion capture suit sits in the station behind the pilots. There are finished shots of K2SO at this station in various trailers and promo reels, but there is no clue as to where this scene might have slotted into the original version of the film. Given Jyn is now carrying both a code cylinder and a Rebel comlink in her vest pocket, the latter of which she only acquires during her attempt to save her father, this scene has to be from their original flight to Scarif for the final mission. In fact, in the theatrical cut, there's an editing error during their arrival over Scarif that shines more light on this earlier footage. When Bodhi successfully gives the Imperial code to get through the shield gate, he's in the co-pilot seat of the shuttle. Cassian comes up from the cargo hold as they celebrate with relief, and then it cuts to hands on the yoke of the shuttle piloting them planetside. You can immediately see this is Cassian's outfit and vest, but it's been horizontally flipped in the edit to appear to be from the co-pilot seat, trying to indicate to us that's Bodhi, but it's obviously Cassian. And even more baffling, I found the correct shot of Bodhi's arms in a random TV ad for the film. How did the marketing people end up with shots the film's editors couldn't find? This is an accidental fragment of the original version of Rogue One that made it into the final edit, as Cassian never pilots the Imperial shuttle in the theatrical cut, nor does K2SO ever occupy that station. K2 is always the pilot in the theatrical cut in every ship they use, and given that we know most Star Wars vehicles have the pilot flying from the left seat as is standard, it's also odd to consider that Cassian is shown in this earlier deleted footage leaving for Jedha flying from the U-Wing's co-pilot seat. Insofar as K2 is concerned, they clearly promoted him in the reshoots to pilot, because they went to the trouble to erase him from this shot of the commandos for the final film. And this also explains why Cassian was deleted from this shot for the final edit as well. He was headed up to the cockpit to fly the ship, Jin would have followed, and then K2SO would eventually head up to man the tech station. So Cassian simply disappears from this scene until they reach the shield gate and he climbs up from the lower hold. As most of the shots in these scenes don't show the occupant of the chair when Jin is on camera, I would bet money Cassian was in that chair and erased from the few shots he would have been seen. The reshoots hyperfixated on K2SO being the pilot to the degree they deleted Cassian from this shot and K2SO from this shot, but somehow didn't realize the rebel base acting like it was on full alert after an official stand down doesn't work. Bodhi has a cool and sadly deleted line that might have been from the pickups, but again, it's tough to say, though I'd bet it could be from the original flight to Scarif.
You might want to strap in.
The commandos arrive at Scarif and are about to pass through the shield gate, and Jin gives her speech to the soldiers, which when pieced together from the promotional material, much like all of the alternate takes of Jin in the opening interrogation, has a much different read than the performance chosen for the final cut.
We'll take the next chance. And the next, until we win, and the chances are spent.
Planetside, the original cut has massive differences to what we finally saw in theaters. In the released version, there's one facility that houses both the Imperial Data Archive and the transmission tower. However, this was radically altered from the original concept. As originally written and filmed, the Scarif Data Archive was on one end of the island, while the main transmission tower was at the opposite. When you think about it tactically, from a security perspective, it would make Star Wars sense to keep the transmission center a good distance from the data itself, so any spies couldn't infiltrate and transmit within the same location. This was changed to one building so the movie would effectively speed up, as apparently Disney executives wanted the film closer to 2 hours than 2.5. Yeah, apparently the corporate geniuses at the studio felt audiences wouldn't want more Star Wars action scenes at the end of the film. This was a mandate that would not carry over to the far slower and ponderous Last Jedi, which was allowed to clock in at 152 grueling minutes, rivaled only by the equally mid Rise of Skywalker, which ran 3 minutes longer than that. So all of the amazing battle scenes Edwards had filmed in the Maldives, which resulted in all of the amazing beach invasion shots in the trailers and marketing, were about to get cut down and rearranged until very little of it was left. But like an eccentric winning lottery ticket buyer, Rogue One doesn't call out how epic the battle could have been, but there are signs if you know what you're looking at. Before we dive into the details, I do need to address a weird misconception I've heard from some Star Wars fanboys. They seem to believe that for the filming of Rogue One, none of the principal cast traveled to the Maldives for shooting Scarif exterior scenes. Instead, they index on stories of the beach being recreated in the UK and the bunker doors and other items set up there for the outdoor location scenes with the principal actors. I'm not sure if this is because they don't know much about filmmaking, or maybe they don't watch enough behind-the-scenes features, or if they don't understand that one thing doesn't preclude the other. But let's put this to rest here and now. The main cast did travel with the production team to the Maldives to film a ton of exterior location shots of the beaches, palm forests, and other business. In fact, they shot an entire featurette about being there.
We're just here because Alan loves scuba diving and I come from a tropical country.
So, facts 1, fanboys 0, I guess. Was there a recreation of one of the bunkers and a section of the beach constructed in the UK for additional filming? Yes. Was it for the reshoots? Not specifically. It was for principal photography to handle many of the practical effects in the battle, like massive explosions, because that's something I'm sure the Maldives government wasn't keen on allowing to happen to their pristine beaches. Given that there are 2 bunker entry points in the film, I suspect this standing set was repurposed for both the shuttle landing pad location and the transmission tower entrance during filming. It might also have been used for pickups during the reshoots, given how much the final battle changed in post-production, but it's tough to pin down. Okay, the commandos are now on the surface of Scarif, and in this original version of the film, they have landed outside the data archive. Jin and Cassian get their disguises as in the theatrical version, and with K2SO make their way into the facility. They walk through an underground subway system in the base that ostensibly served as a transit method for Imperials traveling from the data archive to the transmission tower at the other end of the island. Back at the shuttle, Melshi and the commandos are getting ready to cause chaos. In the theatrical version, Bodhi never gets far away from the the shuttle. In the original version, Bod accompanies the commandos out into the palm forest to stage their diversion, and he brings the cable backpack with him, which would suggest he's already preparing some kind of contingency for transmitting data or communications. Cassian gives the green light and the commandos start their shenanigans. Meanwhile, Jyn, Cassian, and K2SO reach the data vault. This sequence was entirely reshot for the theatrical cut with a new set. Remember, in this original version, the data vault is not under the transmission tower, but a separate facility. So instead of K2SO holding off troops and telling Jyn and Cassian to climb the vault up to the tower, which always felt a bit too contrived, they fight the guards, get the plans out of the vault, and learn Krennic has ordered the base locked down with the arrival of the rebel fleet. This means they won't be able to take the shuttle and escape.
Keep the engine running. You're our only way out of here.
Their only option now is the transmission tower at the other end of the island. However, the entire Imperial garrison is between them and the tower, and with the base on lockdown, use of that train to get there quickly is probably no longer an option. Now the rebels must run the gauntlet, and this is where that footage of Jyn, Cassian, and K2SO running back down the train platform comes into play. You can see the Death Star plans in Jyn's right hand. I admit I'm not sure why they ditched their disguises at this stage in the original story, as it would seem to me a smarter move to keep them on to try and fool as many Imperials as possible on the way out. But because we don't have access to the original script, any better explanation for them ditching their Imperial uniforms at this stage is all guesswork. Scant imagery hints at their breakout from the data vault through the bunker doorway they came in from. Right here is another area where the original plot of the movie gets blurry. Based on very brief glimpses and photos, we know Bod goes with the commandos initially to stage the diversion, but from every shred of evidence we have, Bod is not with the team during the fight across the island to the transmission tower. I guess it's also possible that Bod is in the shuttle ready for extraction, keeping the engines running.
What should I do? Keep the engine running.
And the rest of the commandos are holding off the Imperial troops at the edges of the tarmac to keep the landing pad from being overrun. And it might even help explain exactly where that line comes from in the Imperial shuttle where Jyn tells the crew to speak up if they have concerns about being left behind.
Anyone not willing to risk being left behind? Now's your chance to speak up.
This single shot is arguably the most confusing bit of deleted footage revealed from Rogue One, and that's saying a lot by now. It's definitely taking place right inside the cargo bay of the Imperial shuttle. This couldn't be a scene where she's changing out of the Imperial uniform again, because she wouldn't have time to do so on the shuttle as they're already being pursued. And we also know in the original cut she changes out of her disguise in the vault, which is a decision that still baffles me. At the same time, she's clearly putting her vest back on after removing her jacket, a jacket she wore under the rebel poncho on Eadu. Yet she's not soaked to the bone either, which she definitely was after the Eadu scene. It's also worth noting she's only carrying the single code cylinder in her vest pocket, and the comm link she has after Eadu is not yet present. So let's consider this might be on the way to Scarif, even though every indication is Jyn never left for Scarif with her jacket. So why is she putting her vest back on here? In this context, she could be telling the commando team on the shuttle the plan is to cause chaos behind enemy lines and cover the shuttle until the plans are on board and the ship is away. With that comes the risk anyone who holds off the Imperial troops to protect the shuttle could be left behind. This clip is the one infuriating puzzle piece of the lost cut of Rogue One that doesn't fit anywhere on the game board.
Anyone not willing to risk being left behind? Now's your chance to speak up.
The line is loaded as hell, the location of the line is obvious without doubt, but Jyn's costume details bring in continuity questions that cast doubt on where this scene could have happened in the story. And even if her costume error is simply one of those common mistakes during the making of movies, her clear motion of putting her vest on without her jacket is still a roadblock to determining where this line went in the original cut. Despite the weird pulling her vest back on move, the only place I can see this line working is on the approach to Scarif, or just after they land and she's giving the commandos one last reminder that leaving the shuttle involves the risk of being abandoned, because the moment the plans are in that shuttle, they're taking off immediately. Because remember, their plan is to escape in the shuttle.
Keep the engine running. You're our only way out of here.
They're not anticipating Admiral Raddus being an idiot. Now the final battle begins that was all over the trailers that Lucasfilm inexplicably decided to cut to ribbons. Jyn, Cassian, K2SO, Baze, and Chirrut all race off across the island with the commandos. Presumably, Bodhi remained at the shuttle with a small support team trying to get through to the Rebel fleet. In the theatrical cut, bits of this sequence were grabbed and used intermittently, played as a mad dash out of the archive bunker and down the beach, across the atoll toward the communications array. During their race against the Empire, as they reached the island with the tower, a number of Imperial walkers now stand between them and the entrance on the beach. This is in addition to the many stormtroopers scattered across the battlefield harrying the rebels. They dodge through the walker cannon blasts trying to cross the atoll. Piles of footage across trailers and behind-the-scenes special features show this sequence, which was filmed in the Maldives. Jyn has the plans the entire way, with Cassian and the commandos providing cover fire as they keep pace. In the theatrical cut, the walkers are worked into general skirmish with the commandos during their diversionary attacks just before the arrival of the Rebel fleet. After Jyn gives K2SO the blaster, it cuts back to what would have originally been footage from the commandos' scramble across the atoll with the Imperial garrison of troops and walkers, now edited to look like Baze and Chirrut's team running from the walker assault and being encircled by enemy forces on all sides. At this point in the original cut, just as they're about to reach the island with the transmission tower, the walkers force them to dig in on the beach. This was also filmed in the Maldives. You can see Cassian and Jyn in clips from this original moment, and in the theatrical cut, they recycle the shots from this scene of Baze using the bazooka on the walker. However, in a sleight-of-hand editing trick, where Cassian was once visible behind Baze in this shot, firing from a makeshift sand dune at pursuing Imperials, the final cut removes Cassian digitally from one shot and reframes the rest of the sequence to obscure him, even though in the final theatrical edit you can still see the top of Diego Luna's head. In fact, you can see Cassian and Jyn jump into the sand pit in the theatrical version, even though due to script revisions, they're not supposed to be there at all. Cassian jumps in front of the camera here, and it's definitely him because he's wearing the Imperial jodhpurs and boots from his stolen officer's uniform. And Felicity Jones is right here, covered up by the alien rebel named Pow. If you doubt the hairstyle, the blaster finishes the argument. Here, in the original cut, just as all hope is lost when the walker shrugs off Baze's direct hit, Blue Squadron arrives and takes out the walkers in rapid succession. And while the editors managed to work this moment into the theatrical cut, it's in a very different context. Because remember, in the original version of this scene, the Death Star plans are there with them in that sand pit and not inside a different building on another island. At this stage of the story, the U-Wings begin landing reinforcements. And here's where a small detail of the original final battle sequence gets fuzzy. The Rogue One commandos still have to reach the bunker entrance quite a ways off from their current position. Blue Leader goes down in flames behind the tower entrance just as the commandos are closing in on the beach. And right on its heels, an entire U-Wing impacts in a fireball on the beach in front of the bunker entrance. This U-Wing, by the way, went through a few special effects revisions during post-production. And this moment is an important clue for the timeline of the rest of the original cut. The U-Wing served as a major practical effect during the mostly deleted beach assault sequences, and the bunker entrance to the tower and surrounding beach were recreated in the UK with a mock-up of the crashed U-Wing fighter to film the rest of this ground battle in a more controlled environment. Based on all the available evidence, the U-Wing crashes, and in doing so probably wipes out the remaining troops between the commandos and the bunker. That gives Rogue One the opportunity to race for the beach and dive over the sand embankment created by the path of the wrecked U-Wing. It's looking to be a straight run to the bunker now, but Krennic and his death troopers arrive because Krennic has been informed of the theft from the data vault. Footage of the original version does show Krennic on the beach advancing on the rebel position with his troopers. And while the troops themselves remain in the film deploying in mostly the same way, the scene is reworked to remove Krennic and have the troopers advancing on the remaining rebels at the bunker entrance. However, when you think about it, the theatrical version of this scene has created a real continuity question. Now that Jyn and Cassian don't have to leave the facility and run to another entrance, just why were the rebel commandos running along this beach at all? Why defend this now random bunker in a zero priority location? Because the screenwriters put in all that business about that blasted master switch that's inconveniently placed out there in the line of fire, and also nowhere near Bodhi's shuttle where he just tied into the main communications line with his cable backpack. In the original version, this is the entrance to the transmission tower at the other side of the island. Isn't it odd how even though the rewrites combined the data vault and the tower into one facility, the commandos still need an excuse to go all the way over to that entrance to find a master switch? That's because they had to find a way to recycle some of this expensive battle footage. Originally, I suspect this was a Butch and Sundance kind of situation, where they race Jyn to the bunker door and then the remaining rebels group up at the bunker to prevent Krennic and his troops from entering, and sacrifice themselves in the process. Very likely around this time, Bodhi's shuttle blows up in the distance, if it hasn't already long before. We do still have Baze fighting Krennic's troops right where they would have been advancing in the original battle, so part of me suspects much of the Baze and trooper footage is from the original production. And the same can be said for Chirrut's scenes here as well. What I can't figure out is how Baze and Chirrut were able to accompany the commandos in the original cut to the transmission tower entrance. The reason I'm confused is because Bodhi actor Riz Ahmed stated in an interview exactly how his original death scene played out. While it still involved pulling that cable back to the shuttle, Ahmed said a minute-long choreographed shot of him running back to the shuttle while dodging attacking stormtroopers was shot, with Baze and Chirrut flanking Bodhi the entire way and taking out the stormtroopers each time before disappearing back into cover. And I'm almost certain these spy photographs at the time reveal that camera setup, showing the long dolly track with Riz Ahmed and his double, as well as Donnie Yen and his double, present for this intricate bit of business. In fact, I believe parts of this deleted sequence made it into the theatrical cut, as you can match these props at one end of the dolly track to this moment in the film when Chirrut and Baze take out hapless stormtroopers. In the theatrical cut, these scenes are repurposed as them clearing out the sentries ahead of the commandos, but I'm 99% sure this is from the original shoot, where they were clearing Bodhi's path to the communications link. The only question mark is whether the sequence was Bodhi being protected as he reached the communication link, or whether it was him being protected on the way back to the shuttle. My bet is on the former, as the dolly track setup does not lead back to the shuttle set, and the shots in the film look like the final takedowns around the communications link before Bodhi would run up and plug in the cable. This would explain why Bodhi can be seen briefly in the theatrical cut, and in deleted shots, in the palm forest with the commandos, which leads me to believe that this shot in the theatrical cut of Bodhi plugging into the communications link is a reshoot, because now he's doing it without Baze and Chirrut's assistance in a completely different location on Scarif, per the requirements of the rewritten script. And a very brief clip from a TV ad shows what I believe is the original scene of Bodhi reaching the link as the commandos race by. It really appears as if the soldiers help Bodhi reach the link, but then keep going, while only a small squad is left to cover him back to the shuttle. In fact, you can see in this behind-the-scenes clip Gareth Edwards directing Ahmed at the original Link console, and you can match the weathering details on it to the console he uses in the final film, but only the console in the close-up shot. In the shot right before it as he's running up to the unit, the weathering on the console is completely different. This establishing shot has to be a reshoot because they changed Bodhi's character location in the final battle and removed him, mostly, from the commando's initial foray, where Baze and Chirrut took out all of the sentries to allow Bodhi to get to the communications link, which is right here in the theatrical cut as they take the stormtroopers down. And I would bet it's the same console between this image and this spy photo. Once he had made it into the shuttle, Bodhi would be shot by stormtroopers, crawl to the comm station injured, and establish contact with the rebel fleet just before the shuttle blew up as it did in the final version of the film. But obviously, I can't say for sure. Baze and Chirrut might have been the ones who sacrificed themselves to make sure Jyn got in the doors of the bunker. Or maybe they were the last ones standing and stopped all the Death Troopers wholesale. The point is, in some form or fashion, this is where they die in the movie. And it might interest you to know this is definitely where K2SO dies originally also. In an ABC News clip that has since been delisted on their site, they show K2SO's original demise being blasted to smithereens in front of those bunker doors. And if you look more closely, you can see Cassian on the ground where Alan Tudyk collapses. His last motion is using the door controls, possibly to lock them, which would explain why in the theatrical cut his last motion is to lock the vault doors. Clearly they were trying to port over some thematic elements in the reshoots. And then it's a guess whether or not the original version of the film had Cassian also die here. Or if he isn't dead and helps Jyn stop Krennic as in the theatrical version. Or if Jyn deals with Krennic on her own and then finds Cassian alive when exiting the bunker and helps him limp to the beach where they die. There is footage from the UK beach set showing them filming this final moment. And in the reshot film, they ensure Cassian was wounded from the fall in the data vault, so he'd have the same limp just before the final scenes. Given this shot in the final film, I tend to think Cassian was always meant to end the film on the beach with Jyn as the explosion happens. However, this assumes they erased K2SO from the ground at their feet, which for ILM would have been easy enough to do. Or it might be a reshoot with a few extras. Again, it's tough to say. So where does that leave Jyn Erso in this final action moment? Well, at first I wondered if the original version of the film ever had Jyn pointlessly going to the top of a tower when communication should be easily possible within the facility itself. However, given how early the now infamous TIE Fighter shot, which they claimed was always just test footage, appeared in the first full trailer, I can't be sure. Let's assume Jyn does go to the top of the big dumb tower in the original cut as well as the theatrical. The production team has maintained the TIE Fighter was added in trailers merely as an effects test, and like so many shots in this movie's marketing, was picked up cluelessly by the advertising people and used with reckless abandon. If this really is an effects test, then why is Jyn pulling her blaster out of the holster before walking out onto this gantry? She's an insane distance from any immediate threat in the final film, even to the extent that it wasn't ever realistic the TIE Striker would have seen her when it attacks the walkway a few moments later. In fact, the TIE Striker would have been more effective stopping Jyn by destroying the main dish. My larger point is simply, why was Felicity Jones directed to unholster her pistol before stepping out onto this gantry if the threat of the TIE Fighter that they now claim was an effects test wasn't actually part of the scene? Because otherwise Jyn is losing a hand she'd need to steady herself on the railing, and running the very big risk of dropping her sidearm, which is exactly what happens. Also, have you noticed in the theatrical cut Jyn is limping here for no real reason? Clearly, in the original cut, she's wounded before she gets into the bunker on the beach, possibly by an explosion, a death trooper, or maybe even Krennic himself. Yet another breadcrumb left over in the theatrical cut from the original version of Rogue One. In any case, we are forced to assume this sequence plays out similarly to the theatrical version.
I lose nothing but time.
The last area of the film where large changes were made was reportedly the space battle above Scarif. Unfortunately, as with so many things involving Rogue One, details are essentially non-existent. What can be said with some confidence is the space battle was more scaled down in the original version of the film. Early speculation on this after the film's release went so far as to say the shield gate itself was added in the reshoots. It's an interesting theory given that we know the two major mentions of the shield gate, the scene at the vault and Bodhi's transmission patch-in to the Rebel fleet, were both changed in the reshoots. If the shield gate wasn't in the original version, then why was Bodhi trying desperately to get patched into the transmission tower in the original cut? And if there's no shield gate, there's no point in the master switch. As loath as I am to admit it, the physical master switch was in the original shoot. Spy photos at the time from the UK show the recreated beach setting with the crashed U-Wing, with Felicity Jones, Diego Luna, Donnie Yen, Jiang Wen, and Alan Tudyk present, indicating beyond doubt this was part of the original shoot for the film. And right there is the master switch console. And in another behind-the-scenes clip from Principal Photography, as Felicity Jones and Alan Tudyk walk past camera, you can see Donnie Yen's double out by the master switch as they prep the next camera setups. We know the only version of Rogue One that went in front of cameras from the beginning was a version in which all of the heroes buy the farm. And we know from Riz Ahmed's own statements that his original death scene involved getting connected to the Rebel fleet. Without the shield gate between them and escape, there would be no need to contact the Rebel fleet. So my vote is that the shield gate was in the original cut. Yes, they reshot the footage of the commandos taking cover at the bunker door, since Jyn, Cassian, and K2SO were no longer there in the revised third act, because they couldn't let all of that combat footage go to waste. And you can still see Cassian at the bunker door behind Baze in the theatrical cut when he runs to save Chirrut. Diego Luna is visible in the theatrical cut in this shot on the right of frame, heavily out of focus and firing his rifle. You can tell they opted to try and minimize his presence by not adding in the blaster effects for his rifle, but the prop is still emitting the barrel light that was used on the Rogue One blasters to assist the special effects team in post-production. And if you doubt me, Diego Luna is also visible in this behind-the-scenes clip from the filming of the same sequence. Standing by who is likely Felicity Jones, or possibly Alan Tudyk, though the figure looks shorter than Cassian, so I'm betting that's Jyn Erso. And they're the last rebels alive in the bunker doorway. Once again, the original cut of Rogue One sneaks into the final edit. However, the insert shot of the Master Switch in the theatrical cut looks like a CGI image, like a shot created entirely in post-production as a patch. Now, I admit this could be a needed bridge shot to get the revised story back on the tracks for the Master Switch plot thread. Maybe the original establishing shots of it or the pacing of the scene as previously filmed no longer worked for the new flow of the scene. But tragically, we have no visibility into how all of these known puzzle pieces fit together in the original flow of the film. For example, we know Bodhi went out with all of the commandos originally rather than hanging back at the shuttle. In the theatrical cut, Bodhi stays with the shuttle until there's the problem with the shield gate, and then he devises the plan to run the cable with his small squad. So the clips and images of him from the original cut with the entire commando team force us to ask what happens at Scarif soon after they arrive in the original cut that necessitates Bodhi setting up the cable link seemingly from the moment they land, because he's out there with the commandos ostensibly before they've started the chaos on the ground. If it is the Master Switch, and he's trying to get it set up from the beginning, that makes no sense, because we know from Riz Ahmed's own statements Bodhi died racing the cable back to establish communications with the rebel fleet, which I would think he would only have to do in that emergency of the shield gate being closed. I can't deny the Master Switch console is in the original version of the film, but is it possible it had a different purpose in the original cut of the movie? Doubtful, because I can't think of another reason for its use, especially in the version of the film where the data archive and the transmission tower are separate locations, so I throw in the towel on this one. The Master Switch plot is preserved from the original cut in the theatrical edit. As far as what actually changed in space over the planet with the reshoots, it would mainly be guesswork with no evidence. Anecdotally, the claim is the space battle was smaller with fewer elements. There's no way to know what that means. We do know that originally the production built 2 fighter cockpits for filming the pilots, an X-Wing cockpit and a TIE fighter cockpit. Late in post-production, they apparently realized that X-Wings wouldn't be employed for a strafing run to disable a Star Destroyer, and should instead be a flight of Y-Wings. I guess someone on the production played a lot of X-Wing for PC in the 1990s. But they hadn't built a Y-Wing cockpit, and all of their pilot footage was in X-Wings. They had just employed rotoscoping to remove Red Leader from the 1977 footage and place him in the Rogue One X-Wing cockpit for the sake of visual continuity. They had also used alternate takes of Gold Leader, who flew a Y-Wing in the 1977 film, and simply composited new backgrounds outside the Y-Wing canopy windows. The production apparently found several seconds of original 1977 Y-Wing cockpit footage that did not have an actor in the seat, possibly a lighting test or simply running the film through the gate a few seconds at the start of the reel or expending the film magazine. Who knows? What's important is it allowed them to take Red 9 and cut her out of the new Rogue One X-Wing cockpit so they could place her in the 1977 Y-Wing cockpit for the revised attack on the Star Destroyer.
We see it, Gold Leader. Ion torpedoes away!
Does this mean the Star Destroyers being smashed together were also added in the reshoots for the theatrical cut? Impossible to say. And despite the now famous Darth Vader sequence at the end of the film being a known reshoot, all indications point to Darth Vader's arrival at the end of the space battle being part of the original vision for the film. Sadly, we know that Leia's cameo at the end of the film was part of the production from the beginning, so even the original cut would contain what I feel is a massive continuity and logic gaffe of having Princess Leia already present and docked inside Raddus's flagship.
Prepare a boarding party.
After this, the only major change from the original version was the fact the Darth Vader scene had not been conceived at that stage. I've never liked the relay race strategy applied to the data disk for these final moments. We can assume without Vader's scene, it would have been something more akin to Leia's ship simply detaching from Radiss's flagship before it exploded under a barrage from the surprise attack by Vader's arriving Star Destroyer, and then Leia having the plans brought to her on the bridge of the Tantive 4 by Captain Antilles. For all the fans of the Vader scene, I'm sure this means you're instantly for its inclusion, even if the original version of the film demonstrates far more solid dramatic beats and story structure. To that, I'll simply add the Vader scene was the product of Edwards collaborating with his own team and not the idea of Tony Gilroy, so it very likely would have shown up in the final movie anyway after the reshoot process that happens on most Hollywood productions these days. For me personally, I think the Vader scene is logic-breaking for the original 1977 Star Wars and takes much away from the sacrifices of the movie's main characters by turning the final moments of Rogue One into something of a fan film. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. And that's really how to best summarize what I think of the theatrical cut of Rogue One overall. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I think the original version of the film was going to be a true war movie, the first of its kind in the history of the Star Wars saga, and all of these braver ideas for this specific tale were hobbled by corporate meddling and then painted over in sanctioned talking points as, "the film was in trouble." A person who is partly responsible for a crowd-pleasing scene at the level of that Vader moment can't possibly have put this film in trouble. A strong disturbance in the Force tells me the corporate suits got squirrely because they don't understand stories and don't have any backbone to commit to a plan of action. And they second-guessed Rogue One's intentions after The Force Awakens dropped bags of cash on them. The original version of Rogue One would have resulted in an interesting main character that would have been the anti-establishment version of Princess Leia. Just as headstrong, with just as much fight in her, and all of the determination without any of the idealism, thrown into the very first uncompromising war film in Star Wars history. A film that would have dared to ask the question, what happens when your only hope is the monster you didn't intend to create? Because let's not forget, even in the original version, the Alliance itself treated her like a criminal, even though all of her actions had been against their common enemy, the Empire. In the original version, Saw Gerrera didn't ditch Jyn specifically because the Imperials might finally discover her real identity. It's evident that Jyn herself was becoming a concern for Saw in other ways that had everything to do with her zeal as an insurgent. Cassian and the other foot soldiers in the original version of the film did not stand in opposition to her. It was this common ground from the beginning of their meeting that justifies Jyn disregarding the Rebel Alliance's deception at the leadership level, to remain fixated on her only purpose in life: wreck the Empire. And this mission was too important in that regard to walk away from just because the Rebel Alliance brass are divided and playing games. What might have been the most exciting ground battle in the history of the Star Wars saga would have followed.
It's not a problem if you don't look up.
However, after the dust settled on the reshoots, Jyn Erso was reduced to an emotionally schizophrenic nihilist with nothing but daddy issues. The rebellion were backstabbing cowards that persecuted people like Jyn who fought on the same side as if they were the Imperials themselves, even giving orders that undermined their own goals, such as killing the engineer of the Death Star that was trying to help them stop it. And at the last crucial moment, they once again tell Jyn Erso, the very person they forcibly pulled into their circle and demanded her assistance, that they don't trust her or anything she's learned. The theatrical version of Jyn Erso has no reason to help these people, especially once her father is killed and they refuse to mount the attack on Scarif. In that moment, she should be looking at Bodhi and saying, "You've got a shuttle, let's get out of here." All of Draven's promises of clearing her record and giving her freedom are garbage. The mission to liberate her father was proven to be a mission to kill him. The theatrical Jyn would walk away from all of that in a heartbeat after Eadu, and take her chances with the Empire on the run. What was briefly a strong concept for different types of Star Wars stories quickly became, give us another Force Awakens. But Rogue One was already filmed and actively being marketed at that time, so the executives created their own problem in meddling with the cake before it was fully baked. I'd give anything to see the original cut of Rogue One, a cut even Tony Gilroy himself verified in interviews exists, that he was able to watch when he was brought onto the project. I firmly believe a version of Rogue One that allowed Gareth Edwards to handle his own reshoots and his own final edit would have produced an infinitely superior version of this Star Wars story in every aspect, from concept to characters to to conclusion.